Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. Whether you are a morning bird or a night owl, welcome to the latest and greatest installment of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your humble host, Dr. Richard Watkins, and we have an amazing show ahead of you today. But before we get started, we have to remind you that the Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, one of the leading research and consulting and engagement firms. Find out more information at span-inc.org. That is span-inc.org. Now, with that out of the way, let's get the proceedings proceeding. We have an amazing guest with us today. We have Dr. David Shiffman. Dr. David Shiffman is an interdisciplinary marine conservation biologist whose work looks at using science to protect threatened species. As an environmental studies and Earth Commons adjunct, he has taught ocean conservation policy here at Georgetown since 2020 and also teaches a field research methods in marine biology course, including a spring trip to Florida where his students live on a research vessel. That sounds amazing. With him while snorkeling and tagging sharks. That's kind of intrepid right there. His more than 70 peer reviewed research papers have been cited over 2,500 times, and his public facing writing has been featured in National Geographic, The Washington Post, Scientific American, globally syndicated op eds, and a monthly column in Scuba Diving Magazine. He is the author of Why Sharks Matter and the upcoming Why Sustainable Seafood Matters from Johns Hopkins University Press. In 2025, Washington Magazine named him one of the people most shaping policy in Washington, D.C., and the American Fisheries Society honored him with an Excellent in Public Outreach Award. Follow him on social media at Why Sharks Matter, where he is one of the most followed scientists in the world and is always happy to answer questions that anyone has about sharks, marine biology, or ocean conservation. What an honor it is to have you with us, Dr. Shipman. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me, Richard. Happy to be here.
All right, so take us all the way back. That was an amazing background. Did I leave anything out? I try
Oh,
to get it right.
so I do so many different things that when I first started dating my now wife, she made me make an org chart to explain all the different part-time jobs I have so that she could understand what job I was complaining about over drinks that day. And I have to update it about every 3 months. So this weird hybrid alt academic path I've made for myself is a lot of fun, but it does make it challenging to answer. So what do you do at all the networking happy hours I go to in the DC area?
Very, very cool. All right, so take us all the way back. How does a one Dr. Shipman become a world-renowned shark expert, the go-to source for information regarding marine biology and conservation sciences? Take us all the way back. I guess a lot of people would probably be listening, like, how did they become Dr. Shipman? So, what did you do in undergrad?
Mhm.
What was graduate school like from you? Let's hear your origin story.
Sure. So it actually starts earlier than that. That there are pictures of me when I was 3 years old with shark toys and shark t-shirts and things like that. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Pittsburgh, pretty far from the ocean. But when I was 5 years old, I told my parents I want to be a marine biologist when I grow up. And my dad said, I have no idea what that is, but I'll find out. And they've always been really supportive of, although I suspect they thought I would grow out of this at some point. And now they're retired, and my dad brings his golf buddies on shark research trips in Miami. So for undergrad, I see the the diploma on the wall behind you. I went to another Triangle institution that we won't mention here. I see your. I don't know if this is just audio, but Richard is making a face at me because I went to Duke. But I went to Duke because of the overall excellent program, but also the Duke Marine Lab in the Outer Banks, which gave me an opportunity to study abroad within North Carolina, but at a different institution and focusing on marine biology and doing independent research at the time on the feeding behavior of stingrays that lived in the Outer Banks. For my master's, I went to the College of Charleston in South Carolina. There, I was still doing sort of pure biology, ecology stuff. I worked on the food web ecology of some of the big estuaries on the coast of South Carolina, specifically looking at how sandbar sharks, my favorite shark, fit into that food web. And it was there that I sort of transitioned into the science policy interface stuff. So big fan of the Science Policy Action Network. I've done several of their trainings and got to some of their events here in DC. But after I got my master's in marine biology, I was trying to figure out, what do I want to get my PhD in? I still want to work on sharks, but at that point I'd been to a lot of conferences. I had attended a lot of conservation events, and everyone always said, like, yeah, the science is great, but we need someone to make it understandable to people. We need someone to synthesize it. We need someone who speaks science and speaks policy. We need someone who speaks science and speaks advocacy. So I thought I could do that. And I found a PhD program in interdisciplinary environmental science and policy. Ended up going to the University of Miami in South Florida, where I still do my field work with my Georgetown students, and I actually teach at four different universities now in four states. Where when my students join me on for research expeditions, it's down in Miami. I've maintained collaborations there. And that program, how I was sold on this was the director of the program said, so when we talk about how do we save endangered species in the ocean and we pass laws and pass regulations, none of those laws and regulations actually tell the fish what to do, right? They tell the people what to do. They say, hey, people, you're doing this in a way that's causing harm. We need to understand what you're doing and how to get you to reduce it. And that means we need to understand the people side. And I thought that makes sense to me. So I went to transition to this interdisciplinary program. About half of my PhD research still looked at food web ecology, but I also looked at emerging threats and stakeholder perspectives on this, and how does all this fit into the science policy interface with the goal of changing rules. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship in interdisciplinary environmental leadership. Then I moved to Washington, D.C. in 2019, and I've been here ever since, operating this ocean conservation, science policy, and communications consulting firm and wearing about 11 different part time job hats.
So tell me a little bit about your consulting firm. What
hmm
made you start a consulting firm and what has that been like operating it?
Yeah. So consulting means a lot of different things. And people who do wildly different stuff can accurately call themselves a consultant. Sometimes they're really doing a full-time job, but they're not being hired directly by that agency or by that nonprofit and are instead going through this external contractor. That's not what I do. I do a bunch of little things. And I found in the Washington, D.C. area, there's a lot of people who speak science. There's a lot of people who speak environmental advocacy. There's a lot of people who speak laws and regulations. Very few people speak two of those, and even fewer speak all three. So, being able to communicate with all of these key groups across the science policy interface, I've been able to make people's science matter more, to make policy more science based, and to make sure that everyone who cares about this stuff is communicating well. So my bread and butter is sort of the medium-sized environmental nonprofit groups that a big environmental nonprofit group will have in-house someone who does what I can do. A small one is very focused on what they do. A medium-sized one has big dreams but can't afford to bring on a full-time person. So I work a lot of part-time roles, sometimes seasonal work, sometimes just associated with one project, but generally trying to working at the intersection of science on threatened species, on their threats and what solutions work, trying to make advocacy more science and evidence based as well as more narratively persuasive, and trying to make sure that regulations incorporate all the science they should. So I work for universities, I work for environmental nonprofits, I work for government agencies, in addition to the freelance writing and public speaking that you mentioned earlier.
Now, there might be a young researcher out there. We get comments all the time from folks in graduate school and undergrad, and they may be considering a life or a career at the intersection of science and policy. For those folks, what would you tell them is important for them to be thinking about here at the early stage of their career and their training?
Yeah, I found that very few graduate programs in science include a meaningful policy component. Especially in my world, that a lot of what I do focuses on sharks and rays. A lot of people from that space come from the sort of pure ecology space, or from the fisheries science space. We're trying to understand where the policies there are just sort of what is the fisheries quota? How many of this fish are people allowed to kill or not kill? And policy includes that for sure, but it's a lot broader. And I would encourage people to learn as much as they can about what policy is. Science Policy Action Network training is things that I've recommended to some of my students here at Georgetown. If you have the opportunity to take an environmental policy course or a science policy course, definitely do that because a traditional ecology graduate degree will like maybe mention that briefly, but certainly not in any kind of useful detail where you could get a job working there. Uh, and go to conferences, read books, read op-eds. A lot of it, follow environmental nonprofits and evidence-based activists on social media, and they'll talk about what is my job, how does it work, what do I need. There's lots of ways to learn this stuff, but a thing that I always tell my students is a really bad time to learn that you have not developed the skills that you need to get the job you want is right after you graduate. You want to learn even if you have years left in grad school. I have my students look at what jobs are available now because the world is changing, but the jobs that are available now are pretty similar to the jobs that are going to be available in 2 or 3 years, especially in terms of what skills they require. Uh, and if I have my students look for those jobs and say, oh, this would be awesome. I could see me in 3 years doing this. And then I say, great. What skills and experience does that require? Are you working towards getting that? And they look at their plan of study and go, oh, no, I'm not learning that skill at all. Great. You have 2 years left. Fix that. Change what you're studying. So there, there, there's no secret path or secret handshake to any of this, but there's a lot of skills that people are not learning in a traditional STEM graduate program. So if you have the opportunity to do something interdisciplinary, that's great. I will tell people that interdisciplinary does not just mean two different types of ecological modeling mixed together, which is what I've seen some people mean. It means a mix of the social sciences and the natural sciences. So sociology, psychology, economics, law, things like that. Most the most conservation science will incorporate something other than just where does this fish go or what does this turtle eat. There's some sort of and therefore we need to do this to save this threatened species that traditional ecology would not cover.
What I hear students say oftentimes is they're sometimes discouraged from taking that interdisciplinary pathway
Mm-hmm.
as it is sometimes not appropriately considered less rigorous. Um, what advice do you have for students in facing those very real headwinds?
Yeah. So your advisor's goal should not be to create a mini version of them, but to help you to succeed in whatever that means for you, and sometimes to help you figure out what that means. And if they're saying, I don't personally like interdisciplinary science, that is different from interdisciplinary science is not the right path for you as my student, who is a different independent human from me. So getting a mentor who supports you and listens to you is really important. And if the person is an analytical chemist and all they ever dreamed of doing is training 100 mini analytical chemists, uh, if your goal is different than that, then maybe that person is not the right mentor for you. So there are wonderful mentors who are out there. If any mentors are listening to this and have a student who is considering this path and doesn't know how to support them, I'm happy to chat with those folks as well. But there, it's not less rigorous. It's just different what you work on. And one thing that I really like about the world of conservation science and conservation policy and working along the science policy interface here is that often at the end of a day, the world is measurably different than it was when I started that day because of something I did, which is something that is not true if all I was doing was sitting in a lab and counting what fish are eating.
Yes. Dr. David Shiffman, interdisciplinary marine conservation biologist, whose favorite shark, if I heard correct, was a sandbar shark.
Sandbar, yes,
Why is
exactly
that your
right.
favorite shark? Break that down for us.
Sure. So first of all, it's no one else's favorite shark. So there's some element of that. They don't. They're to quote Rodney Dangerfield. They don't get no respect. But if you follow hashtag best shark on social media, you'll learn all about them. But sandbar sharks, if you've ever been to an aquarium, you've probably seen one. They don't have a crazy tail like a thresher shark. They don't have stripes like a tiger shark. They don't have a crazy face like a hammerhead. It's sort of a classic model shark. But despite their perhaps unassuming appearance, they've been really important in our understanding of science. They're one of the most studied sharks in the world. Part of that is because there is a sandbar shark nursery in the lower Chesapeake Bay, not far from where I live, which is right by where the Virginia Institute of Marine Science is based, which is the longest running shark survey program in the world. So they've contributed a lot to our understanding of the ocean. They also are for millions of children around the world. They're the first shark they ever see because they live in aquariums and do very well in aquariums around the world, and therefore they can play important roles as ambassador species. But if you follow me on social media, you will see me extolling the virtues of the sandbar shark, and will see lots of senior scientists in my field teasing me for what they perceive as a boring, picking what they perceive as a boring shark as the best shark. But I love my sandbars. They were also my master's study animal, so they will always have a special place in my heart. They're not the first shark I ever saw, but they're the first shark I ever saw a lot of on purpose.
All right. So you mentioned social media. I did mention at Why Sharks Matter, but
Yes.
where can they find you at? Is that Instagram? Is that
Instagram,
TikTok?
blue. I am on Instagram. I am on Blue Sky. I am on Facebook. I'm also
Okay.
on LinkedIn. I'm not using Twitter anymore. I used to be one of the most followed scientists on Twitter, and it's just not useful professionally anymore. In fact, that was a paper we did last year was surveying scientists and science communicators who use social media, and they overwhelmingly found the same thing. I do have a TikTok, but I don't post anything. I use it for watching other science communicators there. I have my book. What my book is Why Sharks Matter. I have a second book coming out fall 2026 of Why Sustainable Seafood Matters. If you follow me on social media, I share the links to all the other things that I'm up to, and I also share what some wonderful environmental groups are up to, and that could really use your help if you have 15 minutes a month to dedicate to saving the ocean, following me is a great way to learn how to channel that.
Awesome. Awesome. So at Why Sharks Matter, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, check it out. Now, what is a shark? What makes a shark a shark? A shark is a fish, but how do
Hmm.
I know when I'm looking at a shark and when I'm not looking at a shark? Break that down for
Yes.
us.
So exactly right. Sharks are fish. That's a common question I get. Are they mammals? Are they reptiles? Are they their own thing? No, they are fish. And they are a different group of fish from something like a tuna or a bass or a goldfish that people might be more familiar with. That's osteichthyes, the bony fish. Their skeletons are made out of bone, just like ours. But sharks and their relatives, the skates, the rays, and the chimeras, they are cartilaginous fish. Their skeletons are not made of bone, but out of cartilage, which is what our nose, so I'm wiggling my nose now, and you can see how flexible it is. What our ears, wiggling ears, you can feel how flexible that is. Sharks' whole bodies are made out of that. And it makes them more flexible, it makes them lighter, and it heals faster than bone, though it's not as supportive out of water, which is why when sharks are out of water, it can be a physiological stressful for them.
So you've got a group of fish that skeletons are made out of cartilage, and you
Yes.
said they include the chimera, the skates, the rays, and the
Hmm.
sharks. We've got that group of fish. What separates those fish from one another? The sharks. I've never even heard of a chimera. When I think of a
Yeah.
chimera, I think of two animals.
You think of the Greek god or Greek
Yeah,
monster.
that's now one animal. So yeah, what makes those
Yep.
animals different from one another?
Yeah, so skates are a type of ray. I still break them out because in the public eye they usually are. The difference has to do with some of the fin structure and things like that, and the shape of the tail. Uh, Skates and rays tend to be more flat-bodied, pancake rather than sausage, whereas a shark is more sort of three-dimensional. Chimeras look kind of like someone was making a shark and stopped halfway through. They're a very ancient group. They're sometimes also called ghost fish or rat fish. Some aquariums do have them, but they're normally pretty deep sea. Some other distinguishing features that sharks have versus some of these other fish, you can tell a boy shark from a girl shark from the outside. They are externally sexually dimorphic, whereas if you're looking at a yellowfin tuna, you could not tell if it's a boy or girl tuna just by looking at it. Uh, there are They have external gill slits, and most have five, which are those vertical lines right behind their jaw. There are groups, so most sharks have five paired gill slits. There's a group that has six. Those are called six gill sharks.
Is that
There's
a
also
sleeper shark, or am I
sleeper
wrong?
sharks are six gills. Yeah,
Okay.
they're in that group. Then there are also a group that has seven gills, and those are called seven gill sharks, but most of them have five. Another really cool thing that sharks have that most other organisms do not, including humans, is this electromagnetic sense. So sharks and rays can sense electromagnetic fields, and that's really helpful if you're hunting for prey that's buried under sand or under mud. So we couldn't see it, we couldn't hear it, we couldn't smell it, so we wouldn't know it was there and we'd go hungry. But sharks can detect the electricity given off it by its beating heart and contracting muscles, so they can find dinner. They also use this to navigate in the open ocean. So they have some really cool features in that regard.
What are some unique challenges for sharks in regards to your conservation work? I'm
Yeah,
imagining environmental damage, destruction, but if you can be specific for the folks
sure.
at home so they can know what to be thinking about, what are some unique threats to sharks?
Yeah, so the number so first of all, sharks and their relatives are the second most threatened group of vertebrates according to the IUCN Red List. Frogs are in worse shape, and that's it. Which is something that most people don't know. It's more than a third of all known species are threatened with extinction, according to the IUCN Red List. And the number one threat by far is unsustainable fishing practices. It's not climate change. It's not oil spills. Those are big problems. It's not habitat loss. That's a big problem. It's unsustainable fishing practices. And that includes more than just killing sharks for their fins, which tends to be the primary threat that most people who I talk to have heard of. But the shark meat trade, people absolutely do eat shark. Where my parents live in Southwest Florida, at the Publix grocery store, you can get several kinds of shark meat at the counter. That is a bigger and growing threat, and one that is more relevant to my primarily Western audience. Uh, so the number two threat is habitat loss. The IUCN Red List says among threatened species, 100% of threatened species of sharks and rays list unsustainable fishing practices among their top five threats. And something like 12% list habitat loss, and nothing else cracks double digits. So the number, and that's also if you want to make changes and do something to help the ocean. Good news, unsustainable fishing practices are also the number one threat to whales and to sea turtles and to coral reefs and to marine biodiversity as a whole. So the single most effective thing that someone can do to save sharks is also the single most effective thing they could do to save those other things, and that's don't support unsustainable seafood. I'm not saying you have to give up seafood and become vegan. I'm not. I eat seafood a lot. That's why the subject of my second book is sustainable seafood. Sustainable seafood exists. It's backed by experts, it's backed by evidence and science, but it can be tricky to find. So that's why I wrote a whole book about, hey, a lot of the choices you're making are hurting the environment. Here are better choices you could make if you're interested.
I think the weird thing about seafood, and I could be absolutely wrong, and so just correct me, is there's a weird thing that happens when you fish. It feels as though the pool of fish that you're pulling from is endless because you
Mm-hmm.
can't see them beneath the surface, and so you're just pulling fish out, and so it operates in a different psychology than other food. If you're out there hunting, you're like, well, we only have this many deer because we can
Yep,
see
you
them.
can see
Fish
them.
is different.
Exactly. Yes, so a
Is that what you
famous
experience? Go ahead.
absolutely. People have a really hard time picturing the scale of this destruction because if it happened on land and people could see it, it absolutely would not be allowed to continue. One type of fishing in particular that gets a lot of attention from the environmental community is called bottom trawling, which, if you watch the recent David Attenborough documentary that's on Hulu now called Ocean, this was one of the main bad guys of that movie. It's not always bad, but certainly it's destructive in the wrong place. And that is dragging a heavy net across the seafloor to catch things like scallops and some types of fish. And as you might expect, that destroys everything on in its path. So we should only do this in places where the bottom is mud or sand or things like that. And it because it can destroy seagrass meadows, it can destroy sponge flats and coral reefs. But this has been compared to if this was happening on land, it would be burning down a whole forest to catch a few rabbits. The level of destruction it causes, and that no one would do that because there would be such immediate pushback. People, there was a famous fisheries scientist who was quoted as saying, "Counting fish is a lot like counting trees, except they move and they're invisible." So it's really hard to get a sense of this, and that's why for so long people used to think the ocean is so vast and we're so insignificant that we could take anything we want out of it without having a real impact, and we can dump anything we want into it without having a real impact. And we now know that that's sadly not true.
Now, you talk to a wide variety of audiences. What is the most challenging audience to talk to? Is it the fishing community? Is it policymakers? What what is the most challenging?
Well, every group has sort of different challenges, and which is something that I really like about my job is that every day is a little bit different. I never get bored. I never get burned out because I'm doing so many different types of things. When I'm talking to the fishing community, there are some things that they absolutely agree with me on and they're absolutely happy to talk about. And there are some words that even saying this word is sort of a virtue signal to them that I'm from this outside group that's out to destroy them. And then the conversation's over. So you have to be, it's like walking on a field of broken glass sometimes, tiptoeing through it. In some of the environmental community, there are extremist elements that are not helping, to put it mildly, and trying to talk to some of their supporters and say, no, it's really great that you care. It's really great that you're willing to make sacrifices in order to help save this thing we care about. All of the evidence and data and all of expert opinion says that this thing that you're doing actually does not help. Here's something else you could do. People do not like to be told that the thing they were doing is wrong. And people do not like to be, and people seem really resistant to this idea that is something possible or possibly able to help is an answerable question, and that's what conservation science is all about. And it's not a new field; it's been around longer than I've been alive. It just there's some new elements to it for sure, but it's not a new idea. People seem resistant to this idea that you know, the first thought that pops into your head after thinking about a problem for 12 and a half seconds is not likely to be especially useful. So we get people who read an article that I share on social media about this particular fishing method that's bad for seahorses. And then they'll say, well, clearly we should do this. No, actually, there's a reason why the article and the quoted experts said we should not do that. And it's because we tried it and it didn't work. So maybe pause before you start offering solutions.
Random question.
Mhm.
Why do whale sharks seem to be able to survive in aquariums?
Yeah, it's a great question. So whale sharks are awesome animals, and if you ever get a chance to see one, if you're really lucky, they're an endangered species. They're the biggest fish in the world. They can be bigger than a school bus when they're full grown. A question I get a lot is, are they whales or are they sharks? They're definitely sharks. They're called whale because they're big and because they filter feed like the great whales do. But they're definitely sharks, not whales, not half shark, half whales. Uh, some animals just thrive in captivity and others don't. Uh, and the places that tend to hold whale sharks tend to have absolutely enormous tanks. So if this animal is, when it's full grown, can be 40, 50 feet long, if it's in a tank that's 200 feet long, that's not big enough for them. But if you have a enormous tank, they seem to do okay. Uh, there are a related question that I get a lot is, what about great whites? Those do badly in captivity. Sometimes, but the great white that lasted in captivity the longest was not released because it was doing badly. It was released because it was doing really, really well, and it was starting to make the volunteer divers who had to clean the tank real nervous. So if when your volunteer labor force is saying I'm not getting in the water with that thing, it was definitely stalking me. Then you make some changes. But there are
So
certainly
you
some.
said stalking. Yeah, all right, sorry, let's back
Oh
up
yeah,
to I'm just probably like everyone else. My
hmm,
favorite shark is the great white shark.
classic.
I've watched documentaries and sometimes they call them just whites.
Hmm,
Amongst experts,
hmm.
is it great whites or just the whites?
Typically, it's just white.
Okay.
A joke I make on social media a lot that seems to do quite well is most great white sharks are actually mediocre, just very confident. But it's typically just white sharks, sometimes white pointers in Australia.
White
I'm not,
pointers.
yeah.
Okay.
So we have in the southeastern U.S. we have black tip sharks, so named because they have little black smudges on the tips of their fins. We also have lesser known, but I think cooler, black nose sharks, which have a little black smudge on the edge of their face. The
Yeah.
value of that is it sort of breaks up their silhouette. It doesn't look it makes it look a little more fluid. But I think white typically scientists refer to them as white sharks.
All right, that's what I'm going to start saying, just to try to impress people.
Yeah.
Um, so, so you said stalking, and let's talk about, the type of hunting that these animals do. The range of it, right? So, I guess yes or no. Do you have sharks that hunt in packs?
There are sharks that hunt in packs. There are sharks. There's a lot of there's an enormous biodiversity of these animals. That when I do my public talks, I start by giving people 30 seconds to just shout out as many species of sharks as they can think of. And I think the most we've ever gotten is about 25 species with people shouting. And I had one kid in the front row who personally got about 10. But there are about 540 known species of sharks, and there's a new species of shark, skate ray, or chimera discovered somewhere in the world about every 2 weeks. And there's a lot out there, and some of them, the whale shark is absolutely enormous. There are several sharks that are smaller than
Wait,
your forearm.
Dr.
Yep,
Shiffman, time out, time out,
yep,
time out. Before you accidentally say some sharks, I want to see if
yeah.
I can name 10 sharks. Because you
All right,
said there was somebody in the
yeah, yeah.
audience that said 10. I'm
Go
going to
for it.
try to say 10.
I'll count off here.
All right. So we've already got the whale shark. We
Yep,
got the sandbar
yep,
shark, the lemon shark.
yep,
We've got nurse
yep.
shark,
We're at four.
basking shark,
Yep, five.
thresher.
Yep,
Uh, did I already say whale?
yep,
White tip,
yep.
tiger, bull.
Now you're at nine.
Ah, uh, come on. I need one more. Is there like the sleeper shark, the
Great.
Greenland shark?
Yep, you beat the
Ah,
10-year-old kid in
whew,
my
it got
audience. Great
hard at
job
the
right there.
end. I was like, wait, can I
Yeah.
get? All right, good. All right.
Yeah. So that yeah, Greenland sharks are really cool. They
They
are
live
the
like 400 years, or am
yeah,
I?
they're the longest lived vertebrate animal. It used to be bowhead whales, which live about 250 years, and now Greenland sharks we know can live to be over 400, and they're not considered reproductively mature adults until they're in their late 160s, which is a really long time to go through puberty. And these animals also have been found with polar bears in their stomachs. So every single person who I've ever told that to has made that same face that you just made.
All right. That's just remarkable.
Isn't that
And not
awesome?
the polar bears in the stomach. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they're actively hunting polar
Yeah,
bears
I
or
don't
a
know.
polar bear
It
drowns.
might be polar bears drowned and getting scavenged,
Yeah.
or it might be when they're swimming from ice floe to ice floe, they're not especially fast or able to defend themselves.
Why does a shark need to live 400 years?
Uh, they sort of live slow and there's no rush. It's a different, their whole life history is just at a different scale than ours, and that's true of sharks in general.
Okay.
Something like a salmon famously will go upstream and then spawn and then die, right? So they reproduce once in this big act of releasing sperm and eggs into the water. Sharks don't spawn. They have what's called a K-selected life history, and that means they have relatively few babies, relatively late in life, relatively infrequently. So sandbar sharks, we're talking about they can live 40, 50 years. They're reproductively mature when they're 10, 12, 15 years old. They have 8 to 12 babies every 2 or 3 years. So that's a lot compared to humans, but it's not a lot compared to a salmon or a tuna. And that's part of why they're so threatened by overfishing. With tuna, one tuna can reproduce, it can release hundreds of thousands of eggs, so it can replace itself very easily. But for sharks, it takes them so long to become reproductively mature adults that it's harder.
Is that true for all sharks? Say for the hammerhead, which you can find, I guess, in schools. I suppose. Is that right? You can find
There,
hammerheads
yes,
in.
not as often as you used to be able to. The several species of hammerheads are now endangered or critically endangered, and lots of those aggregations in schools are gone now. But you can still find them in a few places.
My question would be for sharks like hammerheads that are in schools, are they more reproductively active because of the close proximity to other hammerheads or
No,
no?
and they're not in schools all the time. So they get together probably for mating type things. But even so, it's some sharks are pregnant for 2 or 3 years at a time. The gestational period is really long, but most of them, it's we're talking about human length gestation, and then they take a year to recover and build up some of their fat stores again. So they just their populations just can't bounce back quickly from
Now,
overfishing
do
pressure.
sharks they give birth to live fry? Is a
It's
baby shark called a fry?
a baby shark is called a pup,
A pup. That is so
which is
cute. That is
amazing. I love
perfect.
that. So
Yeah.
some sharks give live birth, just like mammals. Some sharks lay eggs, just like reptiles. Some sharks have a weird mix of that that's only found in sharks, where there's an egg involved, but it hatches inside the mother and then they're born as if live. Some sharks can engage in what's called multiple paternity. So in those mating aggregations, a female will mate with multiple males and then get pregnant by several of them at once and give birth to a litter of half siblings with the same mom but different dads born at the same time. There's also parthenogenesis, which means if a female shark cannot find a suitable male, she can just become pregnant. And instead of the babies being a mix of the DNA of mom and dad, it's just the mom. Some sharks can engage in what's in sperm storage. So when they go through the trouble of mating, they might say, you know what, now is not a great time for me to be pregnant, but I went through all the trouble of mating, and they can just store the sperm inside their body and become pregnant later. The record for that is about 4 years later. So, an unbelievable diversity of where baby sharks come from.
And so that's the word of the day. I just want to make sure I heard it right. You just said it so casually.
Parthenogenesis.
Parthenogenesis. Say it one more
Yes.
time.
Parthenogenesis.
Parthenogenesis, which means a mother can reproduce without sperm. Is
Yep.
that correct?
Yep, without
That's
genetic material from the
incredible.
dad at all. And my colleagues who are geneticists assure me that that's not the same thing as cloning, but I'm really not sure what the difference is, and I've asked them to explain it to me several times. But it's technically not the same thing as self-cloning, though it results in babies that are genetically identical to the mother and but are not cloned somehow.
What are the sharks that engage in parthenogenesis?
It has been seen in a bunch of different species that are not that closely related, which suggests that it's pretty common or that it's evolved multiple times. We usually see this when it happens in aquariums, because in the wild we'd have no way of knowing if there was no male involved. And this was first discovered at a zoo in Omaha, Nebraska, so pretty far from the ocean. And they had three female sharks in bonnethead sharks in this tank and had for years. And one day zookeepers came in and there were a bunch of baby sharks swimming around, and they thought, that's weird, we only had female sharks. And if this was in Florida, I would assume that someone dumped baby sharks into the tank for some reason because they're easy to get right off the coast. But Nebraska's far from the ocean. So they did genetic testing and found, yeah,
That's
one of
that's
one of the
absolutely incredible.
females had parthenogenesis. Isn't that wild?
Yeah, it
And there's
is.
some there's something like that like every year with sharks. It's always fascinating.
Amazing. And then you have what's called a mermaid purse. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, mermaids' purses are that what the some of the egg cases are called, and you sometimes see them washed up along the beach. They're really cool. You can tell at least to some degree what species it came from by the unique shape of the egg case. Some of them are pretty big. Some of them you could fit several of them in a closed fist. And yeah, they're really cool, and they have these crazy shapes that are often designed to sort of wedge between rocks or between coral heads or things like that, or attached to a seagrass, uh, or attached to a kelp frond or something like that.
Now, sharks do not have like parenting skills. They're not rearing their
Correct.
young. Is that
Yes, not
correct?
at all. No parental care at all. When a female shark gives birth, there's a some species have this hormone That means it suppresses their appetite right when they give birth, which means they're not going to eat their babies, and that's about the level of parental care that they provide. So a baby shark, as soon as it's born, it needs to just be a little shark and take care of itself and find food and find shelter and avoid predators. This is why some particular habitats are especially important. And back to your question earlier about habitat loss, why the loss of places like mangrove nurseries can be especially bad for these animals is you might think, well, what does a big shark need with protection from predators? Well, they're not always big. They start off quite small and they need to be able to grow up.
Yeah, I forget the mangroves. What shark lives? It's not the lemon shark that lives in the
Lemon
mangroves, is it?
sharks
Okay.
do use mangroves, but there are a bunch of species that do.
Yeah.
But lemon sharks are very. There's some spectacular National Geographic photos of that because that happens in the Bahamas, so it's
Yeah.
relatively easy to get to, and document, and the waters are just so clear.
That's really amazing. So I think one of the things I really wanted to impress upon the audience is, why ocean conservation is so important. Now, with sharks being one of the most vulnerable animals underneath frogs, which I didn't know, would it be safe to consider sharks as a canary in the coal mine because they are the
Oh yeah,
okay?
absolutely. When they're if shark populations are declining because of unsustainable fishing pressure, it absolutely is a sign of bad things are happening to that ecosystem. And sometimes those bad things might be happening because of the loss of sharks. So we have these ecosystem wide ripple effects that can result from the loss of predators called trophic cascades. And those can be really bad. But usually, something that's affecting sharks is also affecting other things at the same time. So these unsustainable fishing practices often are quite damaging, not just to sharks, but to everything that lives there.
So sustainability of fishing practices is really, really huge. And I hope people can understand it, but because things are not always intuitive to an audience, why is it important that the oceans are protected just for the everyday person at home who might feel like, listen, I live in Nebraska or
Yeah.
I live in Durham. Like the ocean is, why does it matter to me? I'm just trying to milk and eggs. I'm just trying to get by.
hmm
Why is the ocean important?
Well, the ocean's important and affects all of us no matter where we are in a bunch of different ways. But hundreds of millions of humans, including many of the poorest humans in the world, depend on the ocean as a source of food and jobs, on food security and livelihoods we talk about. So if ocean ecosystems were to collapse, suddenly those people would need another source of food that we don't have. And they would need significant aid that we might not be able to afford to give. So that would affect all of us. But also, the ocean is a carbon sink. So when we're talking about climate change, a lot of excess CO2 that goes into the atmosphere goes into the ocean. The ocean is it's where a lot of beloved species live. If you want, you can't save the whales without also saving sharks because they face many of the same threats. When we're talking about coral reefs, people love to go snorkeling and scuba diving on coral reefs on vacation. Coral reefs are under threat, and we need to save that. There are, other than the fact that they're beautiful and they're huge draws for tourism, a lot of pharmaceutical research takes place in coral reefs because any place that's super biodiverse, there's going to be interesting biochemical warfare happening between the species. And that is where we get things like GLP-1s are derived from desert lizard venom, right? And when you have these crazy biodiverse systems with all sorts of weird critters living in them, it's going to lead to pharmaceutical breakthroughs that improves lives for everyone. And the important thing here is we don't know what's there yet. So if we lose it before we study it, it's gone forever and we can't do anything with it. So why don't we save it and figure out what we have?
And you said something right there, carbon sink. A lot of folks, when they think of climate, they're thinking about carbon and how trees are pulling carbon from the atmosphere. But the ocean and plankton plays a big role in it being a carbon sink, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Plankton
So,
as well as other primary producers like seagrass and kelp and things like
yeah.
that.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for breaking that all down. And I also want to point out something else that you just said, how things that are beneficial for humans sometimes come from unexpected places. I believe you said GLP-1 coming
Hmm.
from a lizard.
Yeah.
Uh, when we talk about ocean, it's hard. I'm a virologist. It's impossible to talk about the ocean without talking about bacteria and bacteriophages.
Yeah.
And that's where CRISPR-Cas9 came from, that arms race between those two.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, you're right. You just don't know what's there. I mean, that's really, really important. I have to ask two really questions that I just think are just really, really interesting.
Hmm.
And then we're going to finish off with a really important question here.
Sounds good.
And again, we're talking to Dr. David Shiffman here. All right. So you said that sharks are your favorite, and of those sharks, the sandbar shark.
Yes.
Other marine animals, what else is high up on your list that is not a shark?
I love sea turtles. They're just so cool to watch in the water. When I was in grad school, I got to go to Archie Carr State Park in Florida, which is where one of the biggest sea turtle nesting beaches, and we got to join a patrol, and we watched the sea turtle eggs hatch and the baby sea turtles go towards the ocean. That was amazing. I love sea turtles. Whales are cool. Most shark scientists have a thing about dolphins that we won't get into here because this is a family show. But don't love dolphins. There's I just love whatever the next thing is. I always have some exciting vacation planned where I'll get to go somewhere cool and go scuba diving where I haven't been scuba diving before, and I'll see some organism I haven't seen before. That's going to be really neat. And sometimes those things are huge. I'm going to the Maldives this year, and we're hoping to see manta rays and whale sharks, so fingers crossed. But sometimes they're really little. Like I love some of the coolest things I've ever seen, and some of the marine life I've spent the most time with underwater is nudibranchs, which are little snails that are the size
They're
of your
beautiful,
thumb.
though.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
But people that are just looking for the big stuff would cruise right over the reef and not even see them. So there's a lot of great stuff out there. And the good news is saving the sharks will also save those things.
All right. Huge shout out, plug for nudibranchs out there.
Yes.
Slugs, they don't get enough love out there. No, no. And also, it's ironic because people always look at slugs and be like, they don't like salt, but then you got these slugs that
Yeah,
are
they
just
live in
living
the
in the
ocean,
ocean.
so they do
There you
okay.
go. All right. Another lighthearted question is, as a marine and conservationist, it's going to be weird, but what is your favorite fish to eat?
Oh, yeah. No, I love seafood, and it's important to promote sustainable options for it. But uh, when I lived in Vancouver, in British Columbia, where I did my postdoctoral research, there was a big fishery for sablefish, black cod, and that was a common item on the menu there at some of the nicer places. And it's you can bake it with soy sauce and miso, and it's just out of this world. That's what I made for my now wife on our first Valentine's Day dinner together, and apparently it was a hit because we're still together. Uh,
Good
so
choice.
sablefish is amazing. Um, there are there are there are lots of good options. I'm in Maryland now, so you gotta love the blue crabs. There are a lot of tasty choices. Just to use it, and that for how do you find if something's sustainable? A good first approximation is to use the Seafood Watch guide, which they used to be little cardboard cards that you could put in your wallet. Now it's an app run by the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it organizes all the seafood available in your area into green, yellow, and red lists. And anything on the green list you can eat 5 days a week, and you're great. Anything on the yellow list, every once in a while, it's fine, but there are some environmental issues. And the red list is maybe order the chicken.
And this is a really important question. It's a question that I ask everybody because the gift and the curse of doing this podcast is I'm able to talk to the most amazing people in the entire world. But I'm ignorant on so much stuff. And so sometimes I don't know what to ask. I go with the flow of the conversation. And perhaps I have a guest that was expecting that a particular question is asked,
Mhm.
or they wanted to say something and they're never presented with the opportunity to say it. So, what I do at the end is ask, what question should I have asked? And then proceed to answer your own question. So, Dr.
Oh, yeah.
Schiffman, the final question is, what question should I have asked?
Great question. And we talked at the beginning about these shark research expeditions that I do that people can join. So people ask, how do I do that? Well, there's a few different ways. So for student age people, though we have had older people take the course, including one retiree, I do offer this shark field research skills course through the Center for Wildlife Studies. It is there is a link in my Instagram bio for that course. There'll be more in fall 2026, and people take an online course that is transferable for graduate level course credit, and then they get to spend 3 days with me on a boat in South Florida. But our lab also offers fundraiser charters, which means your group of up to 15 total people can be the only group on the boat that day, and you will help us catch the sharks, tag the sharks, measure the sharks, sample the sharks, and it raises money for the lab's outreach efforts. So people can reach out to me on social media about that, and I'm happy to chat. Would love to get more people out on the water and seeing the amazing work the lab is doing, and also you get to see sharks, and the lab gets some funding support.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Dr. David Shiffman, one of the most followed scientists in all of the world, conservationalist and marine scientist whose favorite shark is the sandbar shark,
Hashtag
who
best
makes
shark.
sure, huh? Yeah, I'm just going through. I'm an active listener who wants you to make sure you contribute to sustainable fishing through making sure that your diet includes fishing that comes from sustainable fishing practices. Dr. David Shiffman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
It's been a pleasure. And for those of you at home, please make sure that you check us out. You can check out these episodes on Facebook and YouTube. The Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network. And remember, the future is not something to wait for, it is something to build. Until next time, take care.